Hey y'all, hey. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. Listen, I am so glad y'all here. Happy St. Patrick's Day from an African descendant of the enslaved who is I don't know, I think I'm 7% Irish. I think I mentioned that I was trying to explain to one of my friends that there's hardly any African Americans who don't have some kind of European ancestry because of the fact that almost 100% of Black enslaved women were the victims of rape. And I think that this Women's History Month that we can't deny that truth. But I'm not here to talk about St. Patrick's Day today. I'm here to talk about the problem with empathy. I learned how to give keynotes at church. I would do all of my extemporaneous speaking events at church. And many of my examples were really of ministers who would talk about how we were getting it wrong and what we needed to do to get it right and what God demanded of us. And I'd never given any thought to that bias that I had. The brain is like a filing cabinet. Everything that ever goes into it just kind of stays in there forever. Some of it conscious, other pieces unconscious. And it was certainly unconscious to me that the speaking examples that I'd experienced were of people who were telling other people what they were doing wrong and how they needed to get it right. And doing so would give you some entry into heaven. But when I started being a professional speaker, my trainer and coach had already had a 20-year speaking business, and she had been speaking all over the globe and had grown one of the few multi-million dollar businesses based off of speaking from her thought partnership, her thought leadership. And one of the things that she told me early was, Nicole, you can't preach from the stage. And I was like, what do you mean? I was funny. The content was getting shared. And she's like, if you want people to do something, you go first. It works better if you tell people how you get it wrong, how you've gotten it wrong, and how your own strategies have helped you to get it more right. And so what that would look like is instead of saying, people out here doing this and people out here doing that, you would say, I'm out here doing this and I'm out here doing that, or I have done this or I have done that. And you talk about how you get better. So I was at a women's conference last week with well over 500 women in attendance. And to the person, when people spoke, they talked about, people who had fired them or people who had gossiped about them or people who had treated them poorly or held them down or um, people they trained who went on to get other jobs. What I did not hear one time, which I think clearly I used to do, right? I just said it. I did not hear one time somebody say, I used to gossip about people, or I gossip about people, or I have fired people unfairly, or I still do. I didn't hear one person say, um, I've held a woman down. You know, and if you have hundreds of women in a room, clearly everyone's not a victim. And I've written about this in the Holy Educated MFer. In some ways, I wrote about it even in Spark the Heart. If I have one vice, it is that I am not the best at romantic relationships. Been married 3 times. I have walked into a room and found the man I love there with another woman. I have had a man that I loved who preferred my sister. I've had If you read the Holy Educated MFer, you know all the challenges that I went through with Ben and the women who would call me and send me messages while I was at work. And interestingly enough, I saw some of those women in that room sitting on the front row talking about or taking in content about how we need to lift each other up. And that's what I think the problem with empathy is. Um, I don't think any one of those people, while they were sitting and listening, was thinking about the ways in which they hold other people down. And so, I remember one time I got mad at Jim Nunnally. I don't even think he knows I got mad at him. But I had just found out that I was an NPE. And if you're not familiar with that term, I just found out that my father was not my father. And I was really upset about it, like a level of anger that I don't even know. Let me say it this way. I couldn't have imagined it before. I'd never been so mad in my whole life. And I was, for the first time in my life, mad at dead people, and which makes no sense to me. So you ain't even got to tell me. And I remember Jim saying, well, Nicole, you've done worse. And that anger turned into an absolute seething because I'm like, how the heck he gonna tell me I've done worse? I know who my child's father is. I ain't never made somebody think that they was Khalid's daddy and they wasn't. You know what I'm saying? I'm like I'm trying to do an apples to apples comparison. But the truth of the matter is, I ain't out here clean. When you read the Holy Educated MFer, one of those women was Ben's girlfriend first. Right? So how mad can I be that the woman who I saw in the room with my love interest is sitting in the room trying to better herself when I have done the same kind of thing to someone else? And see, this week, I was with my childhood English teacher, and I love her so much. My heart rate goes down when she and I are battling through the content that we have to that we're working on for the book I'm releasing in 2024, because she calms me. But she was telling me about a situation where someone had done something to her, and I said, "Well, have you ever done that?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, it will be really hard to empathize with that person if you have never had that experience. So you might sit with and see if you've ever had that experience. Just sit with it for a little bit." Because I know in that room last week, there were people who gossip. I have a coaching business in this town. I know there were women in that room who have fired people unfairly. I have a coaching business in this town. I know there are people in that room who gossip about others. I know there are people in that room who have slept with other people's husbands. And it is disingenuous to not say that it is our job, each of us, to lift each other up and to be the ones who never put our thumbs on the backs of another. Last week, Kansas passed a bill to define gender as male and female binary. And I get it. The topic is complicated. But here's what I want to share, and it's my way of becoming more empathetic related to race here in America. You see, when I think about transgender people, it doesn't impact me directly. I've got one trans cousin out of the hundreds of first cousins I have. First cousins. I got one. She represents 1% of the transgender people in my family, as is the 1% of the transgender people in the nation. And my day to day, I don't think I run into any trans people at all. If somebody is treating trans people poorly, it don't impact me. I follow a couple sites to help me understand trans people, and that's the extent of what I know. If my clients need policies for how to create inclusive spaces for trans people, I do that. It's a lukewarm toe into doing anything about the atrocities that are happening against trans people. And this is true when knowing that in my city, trans women are actually under attack. Now, contrast that. And let's imagine that my advantage was that I was white. I don't have no black people in my family, maybe. Maybe I don't work with any black people. Maybe I don't live next to any black people. Maybe I follow a couple black sites and maybe I want to make sure black people feel like they belong inside organizations, but it don't impact me. You see, it's the same thing. And I can sit and say that my religion has made it such that I don't have to do anything extra or God doesn't demand that we be better. But until I recognize that the way I approach issues for which I have privilege, the same way that other people who have privileges where I have disadvantages behave, how can I be empathetic? Was listening to a session. It was a diversity, equity, and inclusion session with people who are experts in the field. And the question was, empathy has to sit under the foundation of this, doesn't it? And one of the panelists said, I'm empathetic towards the oppressed. I don't need to be empathetic towards the oppressor. Well, I'm not sure what definition we're using. But if the definition of empathy is not kindness, but it is instead that empathy means I'm going to understand you. I'm going to try to get into your shoes so that I can understand what you think, feel, and believe. Empathy is a strategic imperative. How do you create more inclusive environments if you don't understand? I'm not asking you to agree. Empathy is not agreement. Empathy is understanding. And many of the people I know who take really firm stances against something have never read one book on the topic. Not one. Don't know nothing about it. And then we'll say, y'all need to read the 1619 Project. You read you won't read one thing about trans people, not even enough to know that there are not two distinct genders. Just like there are not 5 distinguishable races of people categorized by skin color and hair type and eye shape, you won't read either. And while people think empathy is a soft skill, it's not. How do you fight a war on what you consider to be morally right if you don't have a strategy? And let's be clear, hope is not a strategy. I think hope is important to believe that tomorrow can be better than today and that we have the power to make it so, but that ain't gonna make nothing happen if you ain't understanding what you up against. And I think that's the problem. Folk just always just so upset and ready to go ham because you do not understand what you're up against. Imagine a trans person acted the same way you're acting. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? So I'm gonna try to build a little bit of empathy today to help us understand what we kind of up against here as it relates to the race problem we're having in our lovely country. And this is from Moms Against Liberty. Watch with me.
So you're telling me there's a new threat besides gender ideology, besides critical race theory. What's this third one?
So, social emotional learning is basically the Trojan horse that allows critical race theory, that allows the critical queer theory, teaching our kids how to feel, teaching them about their feeling. Rather than parents paying for a therapist for their children, they let the teachers do it at school.
They talk about their feelings.
They talk about their feelings all the time, or they'll say, it's called formative conversations, and they'll say, so how can we show empathy? Let's say that we have
So teaching, so empathy.
Okay, so if the word, let's say they have a word of the week, and the word of the week at my child's school was empathy. And the teacher started talking, how can we show empathy? And then she says, if you have a friend that has 2 moms, how can you have empathy? Well, my child comes home and says, Mom, There can be two moms, you know, and it's these conversations really ingrained with ingrained.
Social emotional learning, evidence-based and proven to help children have permission to feel. I was 45 years old when I found out my father was not my father, and my therapist assigned me a book called Permission to Feel. I was 45 years old when I learned that I had zero ability to recognize emotions beyond maybe 4 or 5 different types. Was 45 years old before I spent any time processing those feelings and emotions, labeling them, and spending time expressing them so I could regulate them. What I had been taught was how to suppress my feelings, and suppressed and repressed feelings come out in a very interesting way, but they're going to come out. They're going to come out. And then when it comes out, and it comes out in an ugly way, and we try to blow all of that through other people, we act like we don't know what happened. We have no idea why our prisons are blowing up. We have no idea why suicide rate is up. We have no idea why there's so many mental health challenges and people can't come to work. We just don't know why people don't want to go to church. We have no idea why people don't want to work. We don't know why. We don't know why. We don't know why. You see, if you're being empathetic, sugar, you do know why. Because you think about those things for which you just disagree with and you don't want to get any traction and you don't know much about it. How do you behave? You push the narrative that is the dominant one, the one that supports your position, regardless of if you're right or wrong. Have I done it? Absolutely, I have. Where did I learn it? Race and racism is the best way to learn it. But we don't get to bow out and say, oh my God, look at what's happening over here from a race perspective when we do it from a gender perspective, when we do it from a wealth perspective, when we do it from an academic perspective, when we do it from a parental perspective. You tell me how you treat children who have no power over you, and then I'll ask you, do you understand white folks in America? Empathy. Empathy. And it occurred to me a couple of years ago that all of this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, everything that we're trying to do about change management and retention, anything we're trying to do around creating an engagement culture, none of it's going to work if we can't dig into empathy. And I'm telling you, the problem is it's hard to be the one to go first. You think I want to get on here? Even though I wrote it in a book, I know people don't even get to the 3rd chapter of the book. The 3rd chapter of the book is called The Motherfucker, so people don't even get to that chapter because the curse word just too hard for them. And so I know it's highly unlikely that people going to read the story about what happened with me and Ben. You know how hard it is to get on here and say, you know what, Ben had a girlfriend when I was going through my divorce and we ended up together. It's much easier for me to tell you, yeah, I was at this event and the girl who slept with my husband was sitting on the 2nd row. That's the problem with empathy. We have to recognize that the thing that sometimes upsets us the most, you say somebody gossiping about you, you say somebody treats you funny. Are you gossiping? Are you treating people funny? Do you know what that feels like? Now change your behavior. Now change your behavior. What you want, you go first. That's the problem with empathy. That's the problem. We want to talk about what everybody else done did. Me too. So much more fun. More people jump on your bandwagon. You get more likes on social media. Standing in the pulpit, whatever your pulpit is, telling people how they wrong, ain't never gonna sell nobody on your idea. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. We got work to do.